Today's daf we're going to be learning is Avodah Zarah daf Samach Vav. This is the daf for Shabbat. We're going to get started with a little bit of background. Now, in terms of laws of nullification, we've learned that there's a law in the Torah that things are batel berov, that things get nullified in a majority. However, the rabbis instituted that they were going to be more strict and things are going to be mavatel 1 in 60. Okay, classic example, a drop of milk falls into your cholent. Is your cholent forbidden? It depends how much milk. If there's 60 times the amount of milk in the cholent, the milk is nullified. That's classic laws of bitul. Now, if you look at that example, that's an example of what we call min b'she'eno mino. There are two different things. There's milk and there's cholent. The taste is different. Everything about them is different, completely different, right? Besides that, one is milk, one is meat, but they're completely different in every way. So when things are completely different and when something falls into the other, it gets absorbed and kind of disappears. If you don't taste the milk, then it's as if it's not there. However, what if you have a cholent that falls into cholent? Okay, you have two different cholents. One is forbidden. Let's say it's a not kosher cholent, okay, with non-kosher meat in it, and it falls into the other cholent. Now, in this case, we call this min b'mino. These are two of the same types. Now, you can't say the way the milk lost its identity, right? Lost its characteristics because it was swallowed up by the big cholent, which now it doesn't taste anything like milk anymore. But cholent that falls into cholent has the same taste. So it's actually not nullified because in order to nullify, it has to be two different things and one overpowers the other. But if the other one is still in existence, it's now cholent mixed with cholent. They're two of the same thing. If they're two of the same thing, then there's no laws of bitul. So that's going to be forbidden. Even a little bit of cholent, non-kosher, falls into your other cholent, it's forbidden. That's agreed by everybody. Now today is going to be a big machlokot, debates between Rava and Abaye. So the first one starts the very first words on our daf. Chamra atike be'inve. Now we talked about wine falling on top of grapes and they need to be rinsed, right? If the grapes are, okay, but let's say they're cracked, then it's going to be forbidden. If you have chamra atike be'inve, you have old wine, okay, meaning it's properly fermented wine, that falls on grapes. Those are two completely different things, and therefore divrei hakol b'no tam. Everybody agrees. We see machloket Abaye and Rava, but on this point, everyone agrees that if there's not enough wine that you can actually taste it mixed with the grapes, and you don't taste it at all, remember we're talking about wine that's yein nesech, it's not forbidden. It's batel. It's nullified. Because these are two completely different things, even though wine is made from grapes, right? One is wine and one is grapes, and the wine doesn't taste anything like the grapes. But what if it's new wine? Now, new wine is basically juice of grapes. It doesn't taste much different yet. So if you have new wine mixed in with grapes, right, that's spilled on top of grapes, and the wine is yein nesech, Abaye says this is not batel. They're considered one and the same because the taste is the same. Rava amal b'no tam. Rava says no, it's also batel. Even if, remember, the grapes were cracked. If the wine goes into there, gets absorbed, it will be nullified if you can't taste the taste of the wine. To which, so now let's explain each approach. We're going to see this with a lot of the machlokot between them. First, they say this is what they debate. Then they explain the reason. Abaye amar b'mashu b'tartama azlinan. He says it all goes by taste. In other words, in determining what is considered min b'mino, one type mixed with another, right, with its own type, what determines what is the same type? Taste. And therefore, idiv idi chad tamahu. Well, they taste the same. You taste the grape. You taste the wine. It tastes the same. Now, by the way, it was a little tricky because before we said b'no tam, what really b'no tam is a catchphrase for 1 in 60. So if there's not, so according to Abaye, it doesn't matter how much there is. This will never be nullified. This is yein nesech that fell onto grapes. They were cracked, got absorbed, forbidden forever. Rava amar b'no tam. He says no. If there is 1 to 60 ratio, okay, 1 wine to 60 grapes, right? 1, let's say, grapes worth of wine mixed up within 60 grapes, it's going to be nullified. Why? Batar shma azlinan. It goes by the name. It doesn't go by the taste. It goes by what we call it. And hayshma lechud. One is called wine and one is called grapes. Those are two completely different things. Who cares if they taste the same? So here's a very interesting machloket. What makes something the same type? Okay, for laws, particularly right now, we're talking about for laws of nullification. Perhaps we can learn it from other laws, and we'll see that as we go on. But right now, we're going to say, Abaye says it goes by taste. That's what determines if these are the same. Now, again, if they're the same, it's bad. It means they can't be nullified. It's like the two chillins. If, according to Rava, though, it goes by the name. So it's all going to depend on what we call it. If we call it chillint and chillint, well, it'll be min b'mino. It doesn't, right? They taste the same and they have the same name. But according to Rava, if you call one grapes and one wine, even though they taste the same, then regular laws of nullification kick in, no tein tam. Okay, 1 in 60. So now we're going to bring a difficulty against Abaye from our Mishnah. Tanan, it says in our Mishnah, Ye nesach shenafal gabe anafim. It said wine. Now notice it didn't say what kind of wine, old or new. So hold off. But wine that falls into Ye nesach, okay, wine that was offered as a libation to idols, and it falls on top of grapes. And what do we say? If they're cracked, it's forbidden. So now the Gemara is going to say, Kasakadata, we're going to make two assumptions. And from those two assumptions, we're going to raise a difficulty on Abaye. Then the Gemara is going to say, oh, maybe assumption 2 is not true. And that would resolve the problem. The problem is that doesn't fit with the rest of the Mishnah. So then they're going to say, okay, we have to keep the assumption number 2, but let's change assumption number 1. And that's how they resolve the difficulty against Abaye. So let's see it inside. Kasal gadatach, they thought to say, chamra chad tabi'inve. What kind of wine were they talking about? New wine. Or, you might want to say even new wine. Even if it's new wine that fell into grapes, still, we would say, right, now, what does it say? And it said it's forbidden. Now, what does it mean when it says forbidden? My lab benotein tam. Doesn't it mean it's forbidden, but if there's 60 against, right, 60 grapes compared to the wine, it'll be permitted. It's a second assumption. Assumption 1, we're talking about new wine. Assumption 2, when it says forbidden, it means, well, only if it gives flavor, meaning only if it's more than 1 in 60. To which the Gemara says, lo, like I said, we're going to change the second assumption. Lo b'mashu, maybe when it says forbidden, it means forbidden forever, and no laws of nullification will kick in. To which the Gemara said, you can't say that, because look at the rest of the Mishnah, the end of the Mishnah. Hamidikatani Seifa, it says at the end of the Mishnah, Zeh HaKlal, this is the rule. Kol sheba hana'ato b'notein tam asul, kol she'ema hana'ato b'notein tam mutal. Right? If you benefit from it and you can taste it, it'll be forbidden. If you don't taste it, right, you don't have the pleasure of getting the taste, meaning you don't taste it in there at all, mutar, it's permitted. So clearly, when it said asul, forbidden, it meant forbidden, but it could be nullified if it's 1 in 60. So you can't say it's b'mashu. So you can't change assumption 2 to fit Abaye, but you can change assumption 1. Abaye, manita b'chamra atike be'inve. Okay, the Mishnah must be talking about old wine. Old wine, remember, we said everybody agrees, it's b'notein tam, because, right? It's forbidden b'notein tam because it's min b'she'eno mino. One is old wine, one is grapes. Those are two different things in name, and they're two different things in taste. So even Abaye would agree in that case that it's only forbidden b'notein tam, that 1 in 60 it'll be permitted, and therefore we've resolved the difficulty with the Mishnah because you don't have to make that first assumption. Okay, next. Now we're going to have a different case where instead of, we're going to switch an important thing. It's going to be the same machloket Abaye and Rava. Do we go by taste, which is Abaye? Do we go by name, which is Rava, to determine if something min b'mino, min be'eno mino? But instead of taking two different things that were different names but the same taste, we're now going to have the reverse. We're going to have something that's the same name but different taste. So let's read it inside. Chala dechamra v'chala deshichra. What if you have vinegar that's made from wine vinegar, or beer vinegar? They get mixed together, and one is isur, and one, right? Let's say the wine that's from the vinegar that's made of wine was yenesech, and it gets mixed up with vinegar from beer, or chamira dechite v'chamira desare. Okay, this is a leavening. I think it's a leavening agent made from wheat, or one made from barley, and one is forbidden, one is permitted. Abaye amar b'notein tam. Abaye says if these two things mix together and one is forbidden, let's say, the grains were tevel, masro were taken or something, or I don't know, let's say it's truma. Let's give an example of that. It's truma and it gets mixed up in chulin of this chamira of barley. Abaye says b'notein tam. If it gives flavor, maybe truma is not a good example. Truma is not batal b'shishim, but it's batal b'matayim. But I guess you could be batal b'matayim, okay, but 200. But it'll be nullified at a certain ratio. Rava amal b'mashu. Rava says it's forbidden even a small amount. Now, how do we get to this? Notice, by the way, now the logic is the same, but the opinions are flipped because the case is a flip case. Okay, you're going to see. In the first case, Abai said b'mashu. In this case, Rava says b'mashu. In the first case, Rava said no tein tam, and Abai says no tein tam. So now we're going to explain. Abai amal b'no tein tam b'tartam azlinan v'hai tam alachud v'hai tam alachud. Right? Why does Abai say b'no tein tam? Because this is mim b'mino. Why? What determines if something is mim b'mino or not? Mim b'mino is going to be if it has the same taste. Now, wine vinegar and beer vinegar have a totally different taste. So they might have the same name, but they have a totally different taste. So it's mim b'she'eno mino. It's not two of the same types, and therefore regular laws of nullification kick in. And Rava Amal, for the exact same reason, right? So let's just read again. I don't think I read the whole thing. Abai says b'notein tam b'tar tam. As you know, we go by taste. V'hai tam alachud, v'hai tam alachud. Each has a different taste. V'haveli mim b'she'eno mino, and it's two different types. Mim b'she'eno mino b'notein tam, and mim b'she'eno mino is regular laws of nullification. V'rav amal b'mashu. Why? B'tar shma. As you know, we go by the name. V'hai chala mikre, v'hai chala mikre. They're both called vinegar. V'hai chamira mikre, v'hai chamira mikre. They're both called chamira. So they're both the same thing. V'havele mim b'mino, and therefore it's mim b'mino. It's the same. Two things are the same type. Why are they the same type? Because they're the same name. We follow by name. And since they're mim b'mino, again, everybody agrees that mim b'mino is not batel. So v'chol mim b'mino b'mashu, right, becomes forbidden at any small amount. Now, okay, so we had so far the structure is we had two cases. There were reverse cases of each other. But Abai and Rava have the machloket. Again, their opinions flip in terms of who says b'mashu and who says b'notein tam. But the basic premise is the same of both, which is Abai follows the taste, and that determines whether something is mim b'mino, and Rava follows the name of it. If it's called the same thing, that's the same type. If it's not called the same thing, we don't care what it tastes like. It might taste exactly the same, it doesn't matter. If it's not called the same thing, it's mim b'she'eno mino. And regular laws of nullification kick in. Now, Abai is going to explain where does he get to this opinion that it all goes by the taste, okay, which was the basis of the two halachot we saw, the two cases that we saw. Amar Abai, Mina min ala, where do I get it from? De batar tam azlina, that we follow the taste. That's what determines min b'mino. So now I want to point out something that we're going to also see later, but he's going to bring a Mishnah, or a Braita actually, which talks about what is considered the same type, and it's going to use taste as the same type, although it's not going to be so clear from the Braita, it's going to be clear from a comment somebody makes on the Braita. But note that it happens to talk about nullification, but it's not talking about this mim b'mino not being batel, okay? It's talking about what determines that something is one min for some other halachic ramification. Okay, that's important to just pay attention in the background. Amar Abai, Mina minala. So where do I get this from? Abai says, De batar tamas, that we follow tama, the taste. De Tanya, as it says in a Braita, Tavlin shnaim ushlosha shemot, vehem min echad. O min shlosha. By the way, I think it actually is a Mishnah. I think I said it right, that it's a Mishnah. I think it's a mistake here. Anyway, that's a side point. But let's read it again. If we have a spice that's two or three names, okay? They have two or three different names. Let's say there's three of them. Vehein min echad. Okay, they're one type, but different names. For example, so Rashi gives an example, black pepper, white pepper, and long pepper. Okay, they're all called pepper, but they're different types of pepper. O min shlosha. Or they're three different types, like oregano, parsley, and thyme. Okay? And they, let's say, okay, now the point is, there's a little bit of a debate what means shlosha is, but we're going to go with Rashi. And they're all forbidden. Let's say they're all orla, okay, or they're all, right, some sort of isur, or they're all truma, okay, or whatever it is. And they fall into a pot of soup. Now, again, we're not talking about, is it min b'mino? That's clearly min b'she'eno mino, right? The spices into the soup, two totally different things. But the issue is, do these three spices connect to each other? Okay? It says here, asurin umitzdarfim. They're forbidden and they combine. So what does Rashi explain here? Usurim mitzdarfim is not two different things. What it means is, if all three spices were forbidden, okay, let's say they had some status that was forbidden on them, and they fall into the soup, and let's say each one, Rashi says, is not enough to give any flavor on their own, okay, but together the three of them give flavor, and you taste the flavor of the three together because they're strong together in the soup, then it won't be nullified. Again, even though it's min b'she'eno, we know there are two different types, spices versus the soup, and don't get confused between that and are the three spices together one type, or the peppers, right, are they one type? They can combine. Because we view the pepper, white pepper, black pepper, and long pepper, all as one type. And we view oregano, parsley, and thyme as one type for this, okay? They combine together, that if the three of them together give flavor in the soup, meaning they're more than 60, 1 in 60, right? Then it will forbid the whole soup. Okay, now the important part, this is what Abai is going to say, or what Abai is going to use to prove it. But Amar Chizkiah said, when we talk about these three different spices mixing together and combining to be a single force, this is the key. We're not talking about, it's clearly min b'she'eno mino. There's spices in soup. Those are two different things, and those are nullified. But this isn't laws of nullification that we're interested in right now for our purpose. What we want to know is these three spices can combine because they're all considered one type, okay? And therefore can combine with each other. Now, Chizkiah says, what makes these one type? Well, he says, Hacha b'minei metika askiman. He says, we're talking about where they're all sweetener, right? They're all things that add a sweet flavor. Or theoretically, it could be they all add a savory flavor. If they're all adding the same type of general flavor, we're going to count them together as one. Comes Abai, right? Because together, the three of them are working to do the same thing to the soup, right? That's why I took three examples of parsley, oregano, and thyme, because they're all adding a certain, now it's true the flavors are different, but it's the same general flavor to give it a certain type of taste. Now, and here comes Abai with his proof. If you say we follow taste, then then that's why you're saying these are all minei metika, they all sweeten, or they all make it savory, or they all, right, do something. That's what makes these things considered the same type. Again, here we're joining them together. Before we had min b'mino, which basically means, again, I guess they're joining, but one doesn't overpower the other. But it's different, because here we're not talking about do they nullify each other. We're talking about do they together combine to basically end up not nullifying, right, and the Isur being in existence in this other substance because there's too much of them. But what Abai is saying basically is, this is what determines a type, the taste. Okay? And that's based on the Braita or the Mishnah with Chizkiah's addition. That because they're all minei metika. But if you say it all follows name, parsley is not oregano and oregano is not thyme, right? There are three different names. So, Rava, you must be wrong. So comes Rava and points out what I was kind of pointing out, which is, we're not talking about the same thing here. Rava amar lecha hamane, Rabbi Meir, he just says this Mishnah is Rabbi Meir's opinion. Okay, what's Rabbi Meir's opinion? To Tanya, as it says in a Braita, Rabbi Yehuda Omer Mishum Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yehuda quotes Rabbi Meir as saying, "Minayin lekol isurin shebetorah shemitzdarfim zeim zeh." Okay, what Rav is going to basically say is, there's this opinion of Rabbi Meir about what isurim. How do we know the isurim can combine with each other? I'll add the words, even if they're not the same type. Okay, meaning this is a totally different issue. This isn't the spices are batel to each other and they're min b'mino or min b'she'eno mino. This is, how do we know that two different or three different forbidden substances can combine together to make a shiur of something that's forbidden? And that's because it says, there's a special drasha on a pasuk, shenemar lo tochal koto evad, don't eat anything despicable. Kol sheti or tol sheti avti lecha harei ubal tochal. Anything that is despicable is forbidden to you. So if you eat together 3 things that are forbidden, and each one doesn't have enough of a requisite amount, but altogether they do. That's all under the general prohibition of don't eat any despicable item. They're all 3 despicable, and that's why they combine. It has nothing to do with min b'mino, min b'she'eno mino in laws of nullification. And that's how Rava deals with Abaye's proof and says it doesn't prove your opinion, or at least not necessarily. So that was machloket number 1. Machloket number 1 was basically this machloket of what determines min b'mino. Is it the taste or is it the name, right? Again, in many cases, it's not the same taste, not the same name. But if you have the same name but different taste, or the same taste but different names, what will be the halacha? Will it be batel or not? That's a machloket Abaye and Rava. Again, Abaye follows taste, Rava follows name. Now we're going to have a different machloket. We're going to have 3 machlokot between them today. This is the second. Chala l'go chamra, divrei hakol b'notein tam. Again, we start just like the previous. Everyone agrees here that regular laws of nullification kick in, which is if vinegar, let's say vinegar that was originally wine, that was offered as a libation, now turned to vinegar, and it gets poured into the Jews' wine, which was kosher wine. Everyone agrees b'notein tam. It'll be forbidden only if it's more than 1 in 60 that fell into the wine. Okay, but less than 1 in 60 or 1 in 60, it'll be nullified. But if it's the reverse, and you have wine that's yenesech that falls into kosher vinegar, Abaye amar b'mashu, Rav amar b'notein tam. If the wine falls into vinegar, Abaye says it's forbidden any amount. Rava says it's only if it gives flavor. Okay, so again, we don't understand yet. And Abaye, we're now going to have an explanation. From there, we'll move to Amud Bet. Abaye amar b'mashu, why? Reicha chala v'tama chamra chala. So the first thing he says, and this is going to be the issue he has a debate with Rav about, if vinegar, now usually this is a case where the wine starts turning sour. It smells like vinegar, but it still tastes like wine. What's its status? That's what it says, reiche chala, if it smells like vinegar, but tama chamra, but tastes like wine, chala. We call that vinegar already. Has the status of vinegar. What does that have to do with us? Well, as Rashi points out, when the wine falls into the vinegar, since the vinegar is always more, right? It's like the milk falling into the cholent. As soon as the wine touches the vinegar, or starts touching it, the smell of the vinegar overpowers the wine because there's a lot of vinegar, and the wine immediately smells like vinegar, even though it still tastes like wine. So now, if we call wine that smells like vinegar but tastes like wine vinegar, then what do we have? A case of vinegar falling into vinegar. That's min b'mino. It's 2 of the same type. Min b'mino. Havale min b'mino, the Gemara says. V'chol min b'mino b'mashu. If you have 2 things, vinegar into vinegar, because the wine immediately turned into vinegar, we say that's any kind of amount will be forbidden. There's no laws of nullification. Rav amar b'notein tam. Rava says no. It's b'notein tam. Why? Okay, it is nullified because he disagrees with what Abaye said. He says wine that's reiche chala, smells like vinegar, v'tama chamra, but tastes like wine, chamra is called wine still. And therefore, when the wine falls in, it smells like vinegar but tastes like wine, we call that wine. And then it's wine into vinegar. Now, what's the laws of wine into vinegar? Haveli min b'she'enu we know. These are 2 different things because they both taste different and the name is different. Right? Of course, Rava would only care about the name being different, but either which way. Right? Because again, Abaye says it's called vinegar. Rava says it's called wine. And wine to vinegar, kol min b'she'enu mino b'notein tam. Right? 2 different substances are only forbidden if they give flavor. So the wine that falls into vinegar, if there's not 1 in 60 of the wine to the vinegar, right, or if there is just 1 in 60 of the wine to the vinegar, then it will be permitted. Third machloket. Hai batiha. Okay, what does this mean? Rashi explains that they had barrels with a hole in the top, and people would smell the wine to tell if it was starting to go bad. That's we just had the issue with the smell. And, also like how good the wine is, what kind of quality wine this is. So they would smell it. So now you have an Oved Kochavim B'di Yisrael. You have an idol worshiper who comes over to a barrel of wine of a Jew and smells it to see, does it smell good or bad, right? What's the quality of the wine? Let's say thinking about buying it, decides not to buy it, is it forbidden to the Jew? So that, Shapir Dami, that for sure is fine because there's nothing, in order for the Gentile, the idolater, to forbid the wine, they would have to touch it. There was no touching. They just smelled it through the hole at the top. But Yisrael b'dovei kochavim, if a Jew smells the wine of an idolater, which was yenesech, Abaye amar asul. Abaye says that is forbidden to do. And Rava amar mutal. Rava said if a Jew wants to go and smell the wine of the idolater, no problem. Okay, why? Abaye amar asul, again, we wait, right? First they say who says what, then they explain what the machloket is, the basis. Abaye amar asul, reicha miltihi. Abaye says it's forbidden because smell is considered significant. Even though smell is kind of intangible, it's still a benefit the Jew is getting from yenesech, not allowed. Rava amar mutal, reicha lav miltihi. Rava says it's permitted because smelling is nothing. It's not tangible. It's nothing real, right? You just smelled it. It's not like you ate something. You smelled it. Okay, that's not really considered anything. This time, we're going to have Amarava Minaminala. We're going to have Rava before we had Abaye in the first machloket today. Abaye said, where do I get this from? And he brought this Mishnah, and Chizkiah on the Mishnah, and from there proved his point. And then Rava said, how do I read that source? Now we're going to have the reverse. Rava is going to say, how do I get that Reichas Lav Miltahi? So, Minaminala, de Reicha, velo klum. How do I know Reicha is nothing? Ditnan, as it says in the Mishnah, Tanor shisiko bekamun shel tchuma. If you take an oven and you light the fire in the oven, right? Imagine a pizza oven, and you put your twigs in, and what are they? They're twigs of cumin that were twigs of truma. Okay, they were cumin that was truma. Okay, let's say you cut all your cumin, you separated some as truma, and then you put it, or you were a kohen, and you put them to burn in your oven. And then you bake the bread in that oven. Now, what are you going to end up with? The cumin has a very strong smell. So even though the twigs burn, and in the end you don't have any cumin left, but you have the smell, and the smell is in the bread. So now Rav is going to say the pot is muteret according to you. The bread is permitted. So what do you see here? The bread is permitted because in the end you don't have taste of cumin. You aim bo tam kmun, right? Ain tam kmun ela recha kmun. You just have the smell of the cumin. So because you have the smell of the cumin, and yet it's permitted, what do you see? You see that smell is not considered anything. Abaye, what will Abaye say? Shanehatam de mikle isure. Abaye says that's different. It's because the forbidden item was completely destroyed before the smell of the cumin, the smell of it, maybe you call it aroma. The aroma of the cumin went into the bread. Before that happened, what do? First you burn it. Then once it's hot, you put the bread in. Now once it's hot, the twigs of the stalks, maybe is a better word, the stalks of cumin are gone. They're completely destroyed. And then all you're left with is smell. So now we're going to modify Abaye a little bit, because Abaye is going to say like this. Reicha is something as long as the original item is still in existence. If the smell goes into the bread when they're no longer there because they're burnt, that's mikla. Mikla is they're burnt. Completely burnt, the isure. The forbidden item is burnt. So then the smell that's left is really not considered anything. But if the item was still in existence and there was a smell, that would be a problem. Okay, and that's how Abaye responds to Rava's proof source. Now comes Rav Meri. I'm Rav Meri, Kitanai. Rav Meri is going to say, this is a machloket tanaim, and then we're going to see, maybe yes, maybe not. So he's going to say the machloket between Rav and Abaye is Reicha, considered an issue, or is it not an issue, right? Is it considered substantial, significant, or not? Is a machloket tanaim. Harodeh pat chama, if you take hot bread out of the oven, unitana al pi chavit shel yain shel truma. You put it on top of a barrel of wine of truma. So it's truma wine. And now you have an open barrel, you put the hot bread on top of the open barrel. What's going to happen? Well, the wine, right, the smell of the wine is going to basically seep into the bread. So is the bread forbidden as truma bread, right, to a non-kohen, or not? So Rabbi Meir osel, because he's going to say, reichas milta, right, the aroma of the wine that wafts into the bread is going to be forbidden, is considered significant. That matches Abaye. For Rabbi Yehuda, matil. Rabbi Yehuda permits, because Reicha is not milta, okay, like Rava. Happens to be a third opinion here, which we're not going to really focus on right now, but Rabbi Yossi, matir b'shel chitin, v'oser b'shel se'orim. He said it depends if the bread was made with wheat or was made with barley. He said the barley is very absorbent. The wheat is not. So if it's wheat bread, it's not a problem. If it's barley bread, it will absorb. So now they say, Ma'ila baka mipalge, which we already assumed already. Is this not the root of the machloket? Mar savar recha milta. Rabbi Meir forbids because he says recha is considered something. Umar savar recha velo klumu. And Rabbi Yehuda says recha is nothing, like Rava. Right? And Rabbi Meir said like Abai. So now they say, Rava vadai tanai. According, if you're reading this sugya with Rava glasses on, Rava says recha is nothing. Well, if he looks at this machloket, he can't say anything other than, obviously, Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda disagree about my issue. And Rabbi Meir doesn't agree with me because he forbids, and Rabbi Yehuda permits. So if you look at it through Rava's eyes, for sure it's a machloket. It's the machloket Tanaim, exactly lines up. But la'abaye milema tanahi. But Abaye, you don't necessarily have to say it's machloket Tanaim. Theoretically, Abaye could say they both agree with me, but recha is milta, and we'll see why. Okay, but they disagree about something else. Amar l'cha Abaye, Abaye could say to you like this: Lav mi itmar la. Was it not said about that Braita the following? Actually, I think it's a Mishnah, if I remember correctly. But anyway, let's see. Not sure. It doesn't say here, but I think it's a Mishnah. Anyway, Amar l'cha Abaye. So it was said, Amar Rabba bar Chana Amar Rish Lakish, Bepat, I'm going to continue a little bit into tomorrow's daf. Bepat chama v'chavit ptucha divrei hakol asura. If the bread was hot and the barrel was open, as we described, that's actually not the machloket. That everybody agrees it's forbidden, like me, because recha is significant. So obviously, if the barrel is open and the bread is hot, of course the smell of the wine is going to go into the bread, and of course it's going to be forbidden. And then Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda don't disagree about recha milta or recha lav milta. They both think recha is milta. It's something. And they'll also agree, by the way, if the bread was cold and the barrel was shut, of course nothing goes into the bread, and therefore, of course, the bread is permitted. The question's going to be, you'll have to wait till tomorrow. The machloket is about blah blah blah. Wait till tomorrow, and we will see. So, what do we have in today's daf? We have basically three machlokot between Abaye and Rava. First, when it comes to min b'mino, how do we determine if two things are the same? Is it goes by the flavor, or does it go by the name? Again, most things, it's obvious it's going to be both, right? Both different in name and both different in taste. But if you have some unique cases like the ones we saw today, where you either have the same name but different taste, or the same taste but different names, then machloket Abaye and Rava. Rava says we follow taste. Abaye says we follow taste. Rava says we follow name. And we saw it in two different cases where they actually end up saying the opposite, because one was the same name with different tastes, and one was the same, different names but the same taste. So anyway, is there bitul? Is there nullification or not? We had Abaye try to prove it from a source. Rava said, how do I read that source so that it fits with me? Then we went from there into the second machloket, which is if you pour vinegar, wine into vinegar, and the wine immediately gets the smell of the vinegar, do we call that wine vinegar, or do we call it wine? And that machloket has ramifications. Is this min b'mino or is it min b'sheino mino? Because is it wine and vinegar, or is it vinegar and vinegar? And then will it be nullified or not? And the third machloket was, is recha considered something or not? And that was this machloket about a Yisrael smelling the wine of Yenesech. Is that forbidden or is it permitted? Do we think recha is something or is it not? And for that we had we explained the machloket Abaye and Rava. Then we said perhaps the machloket is based on machloket Tanaim, which we ended with perhaps it is, but perhaps it is not. And with that we finish for today. Wishing everyone a Shabbat Shalom and a Shavua Tov.